Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome to our Tech in Motion event, all about sustainable tech. I am so excited to bring this topic to you guys and get into this discussion. It is such a good one. For those of you who might be new with us today, my name is Emma Jordan, and I'm a marketing manager here at staffing and recruiting firm Motion Recruitment. We are the founder and creator of Tech in Motion events, and we created this tech event series really to bring together the tech community from all across North America to learn, to innovate, and to inspire one another. We really think that all of our topics do these three things, but I think especially today's topic really hits the nail on the head, and I guarantee you're all going to leave feeling inspired. Did you know that without adequate action, CO2 emissions from the US alone are expected to reach over 4,000 million metric tons by 2050? This is just one of a multitude of sustainability crises that are going on around the world, and these problems become more and more pressing every single year. Today, we have the privilege of learning from leaders in the sustainable tech industry about how they are innovating to solve for these real-world problems we're facing. So I know we're so excited to get into this discussion. I just have a few housekeeping things to go over, and I promise I will keep it quick for you. As the panel gets started, feel free to submit any questions and comments you might have in the chat box, and our panelists will do their best to get to them during the discussion, and we'll make sure to save time for Q&A at the end as well. Today's webinar will be recorded, so it will be available on demand. So if you have to hop off for any reason, don't worry, we've got you, and we will send you an email with the full webinar shortly after the event. Last but not least, don't forget to follow us on social. It's almost the new year, which means we have a full calendar of so many new tech events coming your way. So make sure to follow us so that you know everything that is coming up and how you can get involved. Okay, so I promised you I'd keep it quick. Let's get into the good stuff. I am so happy to introduce to you today the host of the Carbonic Clean Tech podcast and our host today, James McWelter. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Emma. Hello, everyone. My name is James McWelter, and I'm delighted to moderate today's conversation on the future of sustainable technology. Before we start, I'd like to thank our great panelists and Tech in Motion for making the event possible, as well as those who are listening around the world for joining us today. I want to remind everyone, as Emma said, that we welcome audience questions, so please feel free to add questions to our panelists via the Zoom chat. You know, one of the fascinating developments over the last couple of years is that the world has started to wake up and react to the terrible situations we see, from the fires to the floods to everything else all around the globe. And in reaction to a world that is increasingly on fire, we're starting to see the emergence of a number of different levers that are being used to combat some of these massive problems. You know, some of these levers are things like government action, bottom-up activism, corporate investment, and consumer choice. But the lever that has been most fascinating in terms of its acceleration is that of technology and innovation. And so it's been incredibly exciting to see the development of new technologies and the launch of new companies working to solve some of the world's biggest climate and sustainability problems. I feel like every week we're hearing about some cool new company that's coming along, trying to tackle some of the biggest problems that we face. And some of those people are with us here today. And so I'd like to introduce you to our three panelists. First, we have Gio Sordini. Gio is the COO and co-founder of Exos Trucking, a manufacturer of fully electric trucks and other commercial vehicles. Exos works to provide customers like UPS and Loomis with scalable electric solutions for their commercial vehicle fleets. Prior to founding Exos, Gio worked internationally in nonprofits and in venture capital. Next, we have Tim Jansen. Tim is CEO and co-founder of Sofar Ocean, the world's largest real-time ocean intelligence platform. Sofar uses an ocean weather sensor network and next-generation ocean models to reduce emissions for ocean industries. Prior to founding Sofar, Tim conducted academic research in ocean dynamics and has a PhD in physical oceanography. And our last panelist is Alex Dagan. Alex is the CEO of Conservation X Labs, or CXL. CXL builds novel technologies through its labs and harnesses tools like prizes and challenges to spur open innovation and tackle the world's largest sustainability challenges. Alex is also professor of the practice of sustainability at Arizona State University and has led multiple conservation efforts, including the creation of Afghanistan's first national park. Welcome all. And I guess to start with, the first topic we have is, if you can go to the next slide. So what are some of the world's most pressing sustainability problems? Alex, to start with you, as we look across all the different problems that we could potentially be focused on, of which there are definitely too many to name, how do you think about the best way to prioritize these problems? And what are the most pressing problems in your view?
Yeah, if I'm thinking about problems, it's how we're going to feed, clothe, cool, house, power, and transport 10 billion people in a way that reduces CO2 emissions, restores environments, and prevents biodiversity loss and extinction. These are really the underlying drivers of extinction. I've spent a lifetime building national parks, writing environmental laws, until we take the pressures off those systems, we won't be successful. And the solutions we need to scale with the size of the problem that we have. One of the things we're just doing is this thing called drawdown for extinction, which is borrowed from Project Drawdown in Climate, which is trying to source, rank, and track the world's most effective solutions to address the extinction crisis.
I guess, Tim, when you kind of look at the different kind of pressing problems, and I guess some of those problems inspired you to kind of work on Sofar, and I'm sure some other projects. How do you kind of think about what the largest problems? Do you have a similar framework to Alex? You're muted. Sorry.
No, I don't have a similar framework. I'm hugely biased, and I'll be open about that. I'm highly focused on one part of I think a very big problem and very multifaceted, and that's the ocean. When I think about the climate problem, it is the climate system, which comprises of the atmosphere and the ocean. We are atmospheric dwellers. We walk on the bottom of a fluid that's the atmosphere. The other one we hardly ever see, and as a result, we tend to forget about it. So we have a massive ocean data gap, which means that we know a lot about what happens on land. Terrestrial sensing has gone up when IoT devices became available. We know a lot from space. We've been very successful in sensing our atmosphere from space and space sensing in general. We know almost nothing about our oceans, and as a result, we can't really track change or predict it very well. And I think that is one of the most important things around creating consistent policy and decisions around like what's next for the big challenges and what should we be focusing on is measure and track change, identify and try to predict the impact of the things that we are undertaking. So I think one of the big sustainability challenges is really making sure that we create ocean parity so that we actually capture the dynamics of the system that we're talking and thinking about and where we're trying to track and impact change.
Gio, I guess you also focus on a specific domain. How did you kind of approach that initial decision to start Exos?
Yeah, James, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. Really excited to talk about our focus as far as sustainability goes, but also to share the virtual stage here with such awesome people working on really important parts of the equation. In the same way that Tim is focused on the ocean, we're focused on emissions. And there's a segment of focusing on emissions that affects global warming, right? And that's part of why we do what we do. But there's also a public health angle to what we do. And so at Exos, we're focused on electrifying commercial vehicles. If you think about transportation as a source of greenhouse gas emissions, just in the United States, transportation accounts for about 17% of greenhouse gas emissions. And within that 17%, a lot of the problem is in medium and heavy duty trucks that tend to run on diesel rather than gasoline. So if all of us woke up tomorrow and bought an electric car, an electric passenger car for ourselves, it would only solve so much of the problem. It really is those larger format vehicles that are running on diesel today that Exos is focused on replacing with electric technology. And the good news there is that a lot of those commercial vehicle routes are short haul. So these are trucks that are traveling 200 miles or less in a day, return to the same home base. And the effect that we can have from replacing them with electric is both, again, one of emissions and also public health. These are the vehicles that if everyone, for those of us that were stuck inside during the pandemic, saw these medium and heavy duty trucks pull up in front of our houses every day delivering packages. So they're running through our cities and past our schools and really contributing to our air quality, which is as important to us as the sustainability side of the story is.
And Alex, I guess that multivariate approach, whether it's within transport or ocean, are you also looking from multivariate approach when you're trying to create that list of, using the kind of drawdown framework on which problems should be tackled? And I guess because you use so many different elements to any given problem, how do you focus, or how can we encourage people to kind of focus on the kind of core part of any given problem?
It's a great question, and I think the answer is one of the challenges we have with traditional conservation. And I'm an evolutionary biologist. I'm also a lawyer. I spent decades working on conservation, including building national parks around the world, as you mentioned. But it is really clear as conservationists, right? We are literally some of the most depressing people on earth. Our job is to fundamentally record and write about the decline of species and then write up their epitaphs as scientific papers. And that by itself, and the fact that conservation is only made up of this very limited discipline, is insufficient for us to actually solve these problems anymore. And that's part of the reason we set up Conservation X Labs, was a recognition that we need engineers and biomedical engineers and computer scientists and oceanographers and behavior change specialists and economists and storytellers that have to be involved in what we're doing. And that by no means is a complete list for us to be able to solve these problems. Now that all those people need to literally be in conservation. And then secondly is just philanthropy will never solve these problems in conservation unless we fundamentally replace underlying drivers of extinction. We look at, improved monitoring and understanding of those systems. We can restore those environments. We can engineer resilience. And then it takes for us to, do the same kind of engineering as it is to fly a drone on the surface of Mars. We can apply to challenges on our planet. And that's democratizing deep tech. That's developing new food, feed, and fiber and materials. That's restoring habitats. And those are all things that we're currently working on.
And Tim, yeah, I guess that also resonates within kind of ocean context where you're, again, working on the largest habitat we have on the planet, but then it's also, a literal medium for industry to get the goods that we see. I mean, I think everybody's become, very connected to things like supply chain disruptions, especially in the last couple of months, and all those things kind of compound on top of each other, right? So we have that economic commercial layer, but then we also have the habitat ecosystem layer, and then we also have the carbon layer, right? Because of the ability for the ocean to be a carbon sink. How do you think about that, those different layers as you kind of, as Sofar kind of moves forward?
Yeah, it's often underappreciated that the ocean is actually a pretty big part of our economy. Somewhere between 3.5% and 7% of world GDP takes place in the ocean today, and the footprint of those industries is actually much bigger than those numbers suggest. Supply chain is one of them. 90% of everything we touch is transported overseas, as we've seen firsthand in 2020 and 2021 for the most part, unfortunately. But also, if you think about food, aquaculture is already exceeding wild catch in the amount of protein it delivers to us. And of course, in a good future, marine renewable energy is going to be an increasingly large part of our energy production. So there is, I think, not only already a significant economic stake in the ocean that's rapidly growing and increasingly becoming important, and in a good future, one that we would want. I think we're going to see tremendous success there. On the other hand of it, the investments are nowhere near there. NASA gets probably, I think it's about $22 billion a year to do space exploration. All in, I think NOAA for ocean exploration has about $230 million. So it's 2 orders of magnitude different. And that's sort of across the board. I think a lot of other investment, for instance, like last year, we've seen $9 billion in investment in space tech. I can't even find the number what it is for oceans, which suggests it's probably also a few orders of magnitude less than that. But if you think about innovations, what's really important, I think in general, we're talking about over 70% of the surface of this planet, so it's big, and that means that we need scale, just like we've done in space. We've seen transitions from single exquisite satellite systems to distributed networks of low-cost satellites providing incredible synoptic information of our planet at unprecedented density and incredibly low cost, like super efficient. To get to that scale, standardization was needed. In the ocean, we face a very similar problem where everybody is building their own thing. Everything is one-off and nothing really scales. Everything becomes an engineering project. And engineering projects are great for engineers and very bad for everybody else because they cost a lot of money and they tend to break. If you go into the field, you better bring the engineer who built it because that person is the only one who can fix it if it does break. So one of the biggest technical innovations I think that we are now faced with in the ocean is to create scale through standardization. And this is something that we have actively worked on. And I think what's important there is the notion of public and private partnerships. Something that is often overlooked. Like, we are a commercial entity, and some things are just best done in partnership with other types of entities like philanthropy and government organizations, and this is one of them. Standardization means across the board acceptance of some standard to make innovation and integration of different technologies faster and easier, and to create scale needed to power rapid innovation and better ability to sense at scale in the ocean. So we've worked on something that's called Bristlemouth, and I invite anybody to check it out, bristlemouth.org, which is basically sort of a CubeSat for the ocean, or a USB for the ocean, making it incredibly simple for a sensor to talk to a power source or to a satellite modem or something else, to hopefully get away from a very scattered market with very small niche entities operating in not a lot of scale, and driving basically the ability to innovate and deliver basically the promise of scale in the ocean, as we've seen in space. So I think standardization, modularity is going to be one of the biggest innovations that we need in the ocean that we'll see in the next few years.
I guess, Gio, looking at transport, it sounds like you might also have kind of similar needs there, right? Because if I think about everything from regulators to car manufacturers to utilities, if we're talking about the electric grid, basically trying to herd cats right into the one direction over time. And so the technology and innovation, right, also has this piece where it's trying to balance all these different kind of stakeholder needs. I guess what's your view on those kind of exciting innovations and how they have to intersect with all these kind of different types of stakeholders who sometimes are helping but often are during the kind of rollout of these technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question, James. And I think what's nice about the segment that we're focused on is that it's all fleet focused. So all of the products that we built are B2B focused. We're working with large fleets like the FedExes of the world. So we can let the customer kind of drive and tell us what they want. From the e-commerce and parcel delivery folks, we're hearing a lot of cubing out before they weigh out, meaning they run out of space on these last mile delivery vehicles before they run out of weight that they can carry. And so what we're seeing is a drive towards some of these larger format, 26,000 pound, for example, class 6 vehicles. So there is some standardization in terms of what some of these larger customers want. One of the challenges to the accelerating adoption of electric commercial vehicles is the infrastructure. And it's a different problem than it is for passenger cars. We don't have to replicate the supercharger networks that we've seen from passenger car OEMs in the past. It allows us to focus, or one of the nice parts about our niche is that we can focus on setting up charging infrastructure at a fleet depot. There are, the industry is evolving quickly and coalescing around charging standards, and that really helps. But one of the challenges is having enough power at these fleet depots to charge larger fleets of electric vehicles. So installing a charger to charge a passenger car overnight is a somewhat easy problem to solve. You can most of our houses probably have enough extra power to be able to do that. But when you're talking about plugging in 100 medium or heavy duty trucks at the same time at a given depot, that usually means a power upgrade from the utility. And so that's another segment that we're really focused on. We launched an energy services division within Exos to help fleet customers think through those challenges and understand how much power do I have available at a given depot? How do I work with the utility to increase my power load over time and get public or get permanent charging infrastructure installed at my depot? And if not, what are some of the ways that we can bridge the gap, or what are some of the technological pieces that Exos can introduce to help bridge the gap? And that led us to a product that we call the Exos Hub. It's a mobile charging solution. So it's essentially a trailerized energy storage battery system that we can bring to a fleet depot to help bridge the gap between a fleet saying, okay, I want to go electric, and getting that permanent charging infrastructure installed with the help of utility. There might be 6 or 12 months there where we can drop off this mobile bank of batteries that plugs into the fleet depot, but trickle charges throughout the day. So it's not pulling a lot of power at the same time. But when all the trucks come back, usually around the same time, call it 4 or 5 p.m., they can plug into that mobile charging station and all get charged up at the same time with a faster and a higher power charge at the same time.
It's fascinating from what both Gio and Tim kind of talked about. in terms of we have a world as we see it, right? We're trying to change that world, and so we're having to adapt either through standardization, either through, getting through like a faster interconnection queue by having some sort of battery storage in the case of geo and exos trucking. Alex, you sit at CXL across a lot of different domains. What are some of the technologies you're most excited by? That will have the largest impact on sustainability, and are there kind of some common threads across those technologies?
Yeah, I'll sort of mention three classes that we're pretty excited about. We just ran with the Indian government the Global Cooling Prize. So if you looked at Project Drawdown, you said, what are some of the biggest things we can do for preventing CO2 into the atmosphere? One of those things was air conditioning and reinventing the efficiency of air conditioning. So we ran a prize of the Indian government and Rocky Mountain Institute for a 5-fold increase in air conditioning efficiency, while also trying to maintain price or decrease price to consumers and avoid end-of-life issues with the refrigerants, which can be sometimes 20 times as powerful, 20,000 times as powerful as CO2. And what we got out of that challenge, so we ran an ideation component. People were then funded for prototypes and then ran those prototypes for 3 months. That was done in India. And the reason for India was it's literally going to be the world's biggest market for air conditioning. It's a place where hundreds of millions of people moving into middle class. One of the first things you buy are air conditioning units and refrigeration. It's also a place which is getting much warmer. And it's a place where the government subsidizes air conditioning. It's electricity to the tune of $18 billion a year. And it will have to double its grid infrastructure just to meet the needs around air conditioning. In this challenge of our finalists, we had multiple finalists that hit the 5x efficiency mark, but we had 2 that hit 10x. And that technology is really promising that came out of that, because that's the equivalent of taking off the emissions of Australia and Finland. So we're really excited about that. We just announced sort of the second class, these microfiber finalists. And this is, if you're worried about microplastics, 30%, and most of you may know, you eat a credit card worth of microplastics a week. It's in 94% of US tap water. It's in our beer. And it's also a pathway for pathogens and toxins. But one of the biggest issues is it comes out of our clothing, off of the shedding. And so developing bio-based materials that work as good as any competing materials, and even some of the natural materials are wrapped in plastics for things like elasticity. And so we just announced 12 winners, and some of those are algae knit that has yarns from seaweed, mega materials that's taking waste carbon to biodegradable polyester fibers, and then orange fiber, which is literally using agricultural waste byproduct of citrus juices to then go back into materials. There's 12 of them overall. This is what I mean. If we can replace these underlying drivers of extinction, and plastic are a global cooling issue, we can also address it. And then the last one is just a tool for fighting wildlife trafficking and fish fraud. One challenge is, if you're in the US, 30% of the seafood you eat is not what they say it is. If you order red snapper, which FDA describes as 12 different species, it's 90% of the time you're not getting red snapper. But the majority of the time, 86% of the time, the fish that is substituted is from an unsustainable fishery or less well-managed fishery. So in that case, we're not only hurting consumers, we're sometimes substituting toxic fish, but we're definitely undercutting conservation efforts, particularly when we're substituting for places like Norway that are trying to do the most sustainable thing. We also need to fight things like wildlife trafficking, detect invasives. So we developed a tool that democratizes. Another kind of branch of what we do is democratize deep tech. And this is a handheld molecular tool that works anywhere, anytime, by anyone, which literally means it's ruggedized, it has the reagents integrated, it's battery powered, it costs hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars. It works outside of a lab, and it's quick, and it's highly sensitive and specific. And this is for people who are on the docks when you have an hour to clear a shipment, because 90% of our seafood's imported, 1% is inspected, to then be able to see what is that substance? Is it what they claim it is? Is this powder, coming from tiger? Does this cargo have an invasive species in it? The kind of cool thing that happened out of a tragedy is in March of 2020, we realized this would be a really powerful tool for COVID. And we're now working to actually use this tool for also dealing with all types of neglected diagnostics. We're in something called RADx, which is the equivalent of Operation Warp Speed for vaccines for this diagnostic component at NIH, to kind of be able to democratize where we can use molecular tech. So those are kind of our categories of innovations that give me a lot of hope in terms of what we're trying to do.
I guess that kind of real world impact is quite profound, right? Across all those different fields, across this entire kind of problem space. And I guess one of the, things when I think about problems or solutions like this, really getting to solving the real world problem is something like scale. And a lot of technologies get stuck in this kind of death by pilot stage where they never really get to that kind of required scale. Tim, I guess starting with you, how do you think about getting to, the deployment of technologies and the technologies that Sofar has developed to this kind of scale needed to really start solving some of those real world problems?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably the most important question on our mind generally. So maybe to break it down along, the lines that Alex laid out, like what are really the underlying technologies that are really exciting and driving forward maybe some of the capabilities we haven't had to date. In the ocean, well, in general, that's pretty hard. In the ocean, we're pretty Stone Age, so it's actually really easy to identify what those might be. One is innovation in communication options. Right now, Starlink is getting close to being operational. Swarm is another satellite communication network, which basically reduces cost of satellite communication by orders of magnitude. And this is an incredibly big deal. If you think about a remote sensor in the ocean, it needs power and communication. If communication is very expensive, then you can collect all the data you want, you'll never see it, or you're going to have to pay a premium for it, in which case it's not going to be economical anymore. The second part, and that's the power part, innovations in energy capture, battery and PV technology. That's something that is ongoing, rapidly driven by EVs and others, and it's incredible. It's one of those enabling technologies without which we couldn't really see a future for, I think, large-scale ocean sensing right now. There's no good alternative. And finally, and this is sort of like not really on the hardware-related side, but the ability to compute at scale, like cloud computing. The innovations have been so rapid there that a small team like ours can now collect data at scale, like planetary scale, assimilate that data into global numerical weather forecast models, run by ourselves, and translate that into insights that, say, maritime shipping can take to reduce their emissions. So it's sort of like describing a full stack of hardware, data, all the way to insights to a specific industry that a team of our size can now effectively operate, which was not possible 5 years ago. And so in terms of like, how technology can actually solve real world sustainability problems, if you think about an industry like maritime shipping, which produces as much emissions as the country, somewhere between the country of Japan and Germany, whereas their total annual revenues is a lot smaller than the GDP of those countries. So it's pretty off balance. We are able now to, through our sensor network, our forecasts, and our optimization algorithms based on our best-in-class weather information, to deliver route options to captains in the middle of the ocean to basically reduce emissions and increase efficiency. It's a double win. Everybody wins, and it is a direct outcome of what technology and across the board. So all the way from communication, power capture, and compute options can deliver now in real time to customers. And that's, I think, is pretty incredible.
And I guess, Gio, also as scaling out the commercial fleet into an electric future, this is absolutely massive. We're talking about millions of vehicles. There's some slides earlier about the carbon emissions piece of that alone. How do you think about scaling out Exos to meet this challenge?
Yeah, well, first of all, scale is extremely important to us, right? Because the trucks that we build and put on the road are primarily carrying vessels that move things from point A to B, but they're also can be thought of as energy storage on wheels. And so once you have enough of an electric vehicle population with batteries that are 100 kilowatt hour plus, there's potential beyond just moving packages from point A to point B. And the potential to do things like energy management and eventually even help balance the grid through regulation And there are some industries where vehicle-to-grid technology might make sense. When we think about scaling up, in traditional automotive, it's extremely difficult, right? You're managing a really complex supply chain. You're getting thousands of components to show up at the same exact time so that you don't have 99% of a vehicle built. You can't really deliver that to a customer without that final 1%. So in looking at the traditional automotive spend in CapEx and building like 1 million square foot manufacturing plants, we notice that a lot of the capital that gets tied up in those scale-up processes are in things like stamped welding, robotic welding, massive stamp presses, fully automated paint booths. And we ask ourselves, for the last mile delivery vehicles that we wanted to design and build, could there be a better and more nimble way? And what we landed on is what we call the flex manufacturing strategy. So rather than have one massive plant that does everything under one roof, we have smaller, more nimble facilities that can really be thought of as final assembly. So we'll get components. If we try to avoid stampings altogether in the design of our vehicle. If we do need stamping or robotic welding, we'll have a supplier partner who's already scaled up, do that, and then ship it to our final assembly facility so that we have a quicker and a more nimble approach in our own factories. So we have 2 of these flex manufacturing facilities spun up today. They're both about 150,000 square feet, and we'll eventually be able to build 5,000 or assemble 5,000 vehicles in each of these facilities. The first is in Eastern Tennessee, and the other is in Monterrey, Mexico. And part of the advantage here is that we have a much smaller footprint. It gives us a lot of optionality in where we build them. So we can co-locate them. For example, we can co-locate a plant that builds our electric skateboard platform next to a bodybuilder. So rather than having to ship a massive chassis platform across the country to get a body installed, and then maybe have to ship it back across the country to go to a customer, if we can co-locate that body and that skateboard or electric chassis piece, that solves a lot of the transportation problem from a cost and emissions perspective. Another result of that is that these plants are much faster to stand up. We can build one of these plants to build 5,000 vehicles in less than a year. It's also a much more capital-friendly approach. We're not spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these massive stamp presses and robotic welding lines. That makes it a lot easier for us to scale as customer demand grows. So it doesn't make sense for us to have 1 million square foot facility today that we're only using a small fraction of. We'd rather roll out these plants as we grow and scale with our customers. There's also a resiliency factor to this strategy. We all saw the kind of tragic tornadoes in the Tennessee and Kentucky part of the world. Businesses today with increasingly unpredictable weather have to plan for resiliency. And so that's another reason why it makes more sense to have a distributed manufacturing system rather than put all of your eggs in one basket. So that's how we're planning on scaling up. It's multiple facilities for final assembly that can help us meet customers' demands and get to market more quickly.
I guess, Alex, kind of thinking about the types of innovations that are happening at the kind of prize level, you have this challenge around how to evaluate the commercialization and then the scalability of a specific new technology or new approach. How do you think about both of those steps? I guess first the commercialization of an individual innovation, and then kind of get to the required scale to have that big real world impact.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it also ties into kind of the question I think that Courtney just posted, which are what are the tools and techniques to measure sustainability, because that's integrated in it. So first, we are always thinking about scale at the beginning. I think second, around innovation and running prizes and challenges. So my co-founder is a guy named Paul Bungie, who is chief scientist at X Prize. I was chief scientist at USAID, the U.S. Agency for National Development, and developed the Grand Challenges for Development program. We increasingly are innovating on the science of innovation by combining both competition and collaboration. And what we now see in these challenges are doing ideation stages, but then testing stages coupled with acceleration stages. And then particularly bringing in larger companies or governments that would have an interest in seeing those solutions go to scale, and also providing that advice. I think the other pieces is we're doing things like life cycle analysis, which is one of those technologies, as well as what we're doing in value proposition testing, right? Lean Launchpad approaches to looking at the value proposition of something by taking a scientific method to that value proposition. In our case, we tend to focus on three categories when we're thinking about scale. One is the idea of replacements. And what I like about replacements, and I'm a huge fan, by the way, of my co-panelists here. I've known Sofar forever, and everything I've seen on Exos is so amazing. I actually turned around and invested in the company. But the idea of replacements is, if you're coming in with a replacement, you're slotting into a market that already exists, for which demand already exists. And if you can show that you are replacing a less sustainable product, you immediately can look at those outcomes of sustainability. I think second is where we can upgrade existing tech. And this is why I like the fact that Geo's focused on the chassis, for instance. It's a really smart move, right? And we do something similar for a product called the Sentinel. Conservationists use these things called camera traps. There's 1 million of them around the world. Everyone has them. And we thought about building a better camera trap. And then we realized what we needed to do was make everyone's existing camera trap smarter. And the one thing all those camera traps have in common is a memory card. So that's where we connect in, and we added machine vision, machine learning, and machine acoustics that turn passive systems that are recording, species going by into active monitoring systems that allow us to detect poachers with guns, species of interest, diseases, and even behaviors in real time. And then I think the third is where things like artificial intelligence give us huge leverage. That example of camera traps is a great example. I used to set them out all over the world, including looking for snow leopards in Afghanistan. The challenge with them is the fact that you will have to look at 1,000 pictures of squirrels and you may get nothing. And so actually having a computer, an algorithm do that work for you makes you much more efficient. And that helps you reach and cover many more areas at scale. So that's 3 different ways that we're thinking about scale and how we approach it.
I guess, Gio, one of the things as I was reading about Exos is that you have a triple bottom line kind of approach. And so not just kind of the scalability of the technology to solve these large problems, but also trying to integrate sustainability into your actual business model itself. Could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's my personal belief, and a lot of folks here at Exos, that the large and dominant corporations of the next generation will be the Facebooks and the Apples and the Googles of tomorrow will be companies that integrate the triple bottom line. And what I mean by that is that there's not only an economic incentive baked into the business model, but also a social and sustainable incentive baked in, not as an afterthought. So not as a once a year CSR program where we get all of our employees out to pick up trash or to plant trees, but actual sustainability built into the core fabric of what they do. And Exos, as an example, is a company that sells a product that customers buy for an economic benefit. So fleets that buy an Exos trucks don't need to do it to do the right thing for the environment. They don't need to be led by sustainability or the social benefits and public health benefits. They can buy an electric truck from us today because they're going to save money on the fuel and the maintenance and compliance over time. And there's an added benefit to sustainability and to the social impact there. So it really incorporates all of those things. It's not one or the other. That social good is baked into everything we do. So every time we sell a truck, there's a de facto benefit in sustainability that comes along with it.
Tim, how do your kind of customers think about sustainability? Is that starting to become integrated into their approach to business, or is it still somewhat siloed, in the sustainability team rather than it going up through the CFO?
Yeah, good question. I really like what Gio pointed out, which I think that a good product to be successful and to really have impact on sustainability has to be sold in a different way. It has to be an economic upside. You shouldn't have to explain it from a purely sustainable perspective of like, why did we make the decision to buy this product? And so I think what we're doing and what we're seeing with our customers, particularly in, say, the maritime industry, there is a lot of interest in sustainable in the sustainable direction and decarbonization of the industry. There genuinely is. But it's very, very difficult to have that override economic perspectives, and technically impossible unless basically we actually translate the cost of carbon into their economics, their P&L. And so our product is basically saving them money while reducing their emissions. So there isn't a second explanation necessary, but it is available. You can also take that into account and say like, hey, we're saving money, and we have this other upside, which we can't really translate into actual financial benefits right now, but it will be in the future, because there will be taxes on fuel, which will basically offset, hopefully, some of the carbon impact of those fuels. There will be transitions to, more expensive but much cleaner fuels, which makes the optimizations that we're delivering even more valuable. And so to bring it back to your question, like how can you lead towards sustainable principles or sustainable outcomes from a business perspective? I think one is create products that do both. I mean, they have to provide economic upsides now and deliver sustainable promises. And otherwise, I think this is like two parts that maybe go back to my personal perspective on the world. One, I'm Dutch. I love riding bicycles, and so where you look is where you're going. So basically, if you focus on doing the right thing, the chances of doing that and executing on it is going to be much higher. Second, I'm also sort of an applied mathematician. You can think of like a business running an optimization where basically you get to assign the cost to what you want to do. So there's, for most businesses, many different ways to be successful. There isn't just one way, you just happen to stumble on that one way. And you as a business leader get to decide what matters to you. Like, how do you want to be successful? And you get to assign the cost and the optimization. And if you do it right, then basically your successful path might also be intertwined with the one that you actually want to achieve, where the sustainable outcome is going to be great as well.
Yeah, and James, I would add to that and say there are a lot of these technologies, like the one that we're talking about today, that can live on their own and don't require somebody to be super sustainability minded to make the decision. A lot of these decisions can be made from an economic perspective. With that said, there's absolutely a role for government to play in helping to accelerate the transition to more sustainable technologies. And this is something that we've been really excited to see in the last couple of years as far as emissions from medium and heavy duty vehicles go. We've seen governments all over the world, and also corporations at the board level making commitments and saying, hey, we're going zero emissions in our supply chain. An example on the government side is the state of California, which often leads the way with these kinds of things. So in California, by the year 2045, you won't be able to purchase a diesel vehicle in the state. And this is not just to appease, a certain political viewpoint. Heavy duty trucks are responsible for 70% of vehicle air pollution in California. So this is a government realizing what's happening in the state, taking control not only from a sustainability perspective, but also an air quality and a public health perspective. So governments can absolutely help to accelerate this transition. And so that's something that we also think about is what are some smart policies to help encourage the right decisions, both on the sustainable side, but also on the economic side. And that goes for vehicles and chargers and many areas of the industry.
I guess, Alex, we see those quite a siloing, I guess, to an unfortunate degree between that government piece, academia, even government technology development departments like ARPA-E and DARPA probably don't have the same penetration into the entrepreneurship world as ideally we'd want. And so how can we break through all those different kind of silos so that we are kind of like getting more alignment and kind of tackling more of these problems, developing more technologies, businesses? I often think about entrepreneurs should be adopting academics and vice versa, right? Like, how do you get those people to kind of interact more?
Did you just ask me to fix government, our private sector, and academia?
Just by the end of the week, that's all.
No, it's a real problem, right? And one of the problems we have in academia is we have the wrong incentives that don't really favor translation of knowledge. And that's a huge potential issue. A lot of great knowledge is generated thanks to the government and things like NOAA, NASA, NSF, NIH, and ARPA, and obviously department, the Office of Science at DOE and DOD itself. creates massive amounts of knowledge through grants to academia, but we don't see the translation of it. Second is like, we need government to help, but also not get in the way. And one of the things we realized at USAID is we could be equally good at not just building markets, but destroying them. And thinking about how you leverage or de-risk private sector investment is probably one of the best ideas I saw at USAID. It was something called the Development Credit Authority. It's now part of a new institution called the Development Finance Corporation. But what it did was guarantee first loss of 50% on investments that had a development impact. It was a great win for the government. If the government generated development impact, they never had to pay out and they got the outcome they were looking at. They would also leverage this private sector capital because we saw the value of what was coming out of that. And then, you know, we need to think about where the government and the private sector can better work together. But like one example is, we heard this, I think by the others, is there are really bad subsidies that support really inefficient, unsustainable behavior. So how can we actually get rid of those subsidies within what we're trying to do? I think that's an idea. Sustainability isn't a headache for the private sector. It's literally the future of disruption. And there was a great comment the other day that the world's first trillionaire will be made in climate change. And we believe that. I think the key is, you know, we need to think about how we create whole new pathways for industrialization. And much like California did with air pollution, align the incentives, you know, helping with the translation in academia, the incentives that government can provide to unlock private capital, and then working with the private sector to actually create a whole new generation of innovators and entrepreneurs that can solve the twin crises of extinction and climate change.
And I would just add that a lot of what I've found in looking into some of these problems is that a lot of the technology exists already. It's just not evenly distributed or scaled up, as you said. And part of the challenge there is that it takes a lot of these hard problems are hardware related and take real capital that you don't see in a software business. And the traditional avenues of funding for young or early stage businesses, like the typical, you know, Silicon Valley, Sand Hill Road venture capital, doesn't always make it to hard tech. And in fact, you know, hardware is a dirty word in a lot of those conference rooms. Like a lot of your Silicon Valley investors are looking to invest in SaaS platforms, B2B SaaS platforms, and there are good reasons for that. But I would say there is a gap, a funding gap for companies trying to solve difficult problems using hardware that might be on a longer time horizon, more capital intensive than you know, an app development or something like that.
Yeah, I guess if I look at VC capital, right, like they're looking often for 70% plus return on investment. And then you have this big gap down to something like infrastructure capital, which might be half that or even worse. And so what are those kind of hard tech businesses and then the capital streams available to those, especially when to solve some of these big problems, you're probably talking a decade plus to kind of get to the required scale.
Yeah, and for any entrepreneurs in the audience or people thinking about starting a business in climate or hard tech in general, I would say that one of the ways out of that is through corporate partners and through strategic investors that understand what you're doing because they know the industry and they have an interest in supporting you, even though you're not necessarily that you know, quick and easy, massive B2B SaaS return. So that's something that we did in the early days, talking to suppliers in our industry. One of our early investors is the corporate venture capital arm of a large tier one in a space called Metalsa. And so they understood what we were doing. They understood the kind of capital requirements that go into building components and engineering and design and validation and assembling vehicles. So finding those people in the industry in the world that kind of understand your space and can see the path a little easier than a traditional investor is one way to do it.
I guess, Tim, looking at your space, you know, what are some of the big problems in the maritime space and maritime sustainability where more money, more people, smart people kind of working on those problems would have the biggest impact?
Yeah, that's a pretty compelling question. But I think in many ways, the marine space is very young. And so if you're thinking about like the opportunities and like where help is needed, I would say pretty much everywhere. So if you step back, like, what are the sort of like the sectors that innovation is generally most needed, is the ones that have been stagnant for a long time and aren't really, planning on moving anywhere. And I think the ocean space is a brilliant example of that. So if you're brilliant and are looking for a great challenge, this is it. I mean, there's going to be plenty of work, and innovation is pretty much needed across the board. I mean, this is the reason why we are so focused on enabling innovations elsewhere, like through standardization. This is not normally what a startup would do. Like, and we've been hesitant about it. Like, we basically opened up a bunch of our IP to enable the space to become more mature around innovation, because I think we desperately need it. But this is not something that any single company can do on its own. We certainly can't. And so everybody needs to, operating in a marine space needs to be helped to accelerate as much as possible, and bringing technologies to the space, beyond just sort of the enabling technologies, communication, power, and the ability to sense at scale. But yeah, so that's really, I think, my perspective on like what we need in our space really is, massive scaling up, more interest from capital and people to come help drive new innovations forward, to basically bring up all the ships with a rising tide.
I guess, Alex, then, what are some ways where we can actually get those people to kind of connect up and have that these often kind of opaque domains to outsiders, like start to see what the opportunities are, especially on the capital side. We kind of touched a little bit upon that, but then also on the talent side, right? I suppose one of the kind of remarkable things in the last couple of years, brought on by things like, the platform we're on today, but then also by Climate Journey and some of these other communities, is trying to bring people from different domains, whether it's software, whether it's policy, into kind of entrepreneurship and development of new companies, businesses, and innovations. How can we, I guess, kind of accelerate that and attracting more and more people into working on these problems?
I really think that's a critical question, and I think it's spot on. I also agree with the two previous comments of our panelists. We work on hardware. It is really hard. Some of the efforts that Sofar is doing, the ocean is a great place for disruption of traditional technologies that people have used there. Part of it, I think, is I think there's kind of three components that I can think about. One is storytelling, right? And the work that, as much as you are doing at Tech in Motion is doing, is to bring these fields and the opportunities that they represent to the fore, right? Traditional conservation cannot work as it has been. We need whole new fields of people involved in sustainability, and we need to create opportunities for those individuals. I think second is we fundamentally have to change how things like sustainability and conservation science, my field, and even climate science are taught. So we are focused on more multidisciplinary, experiential, solutions-oriented learning, right? This idea of not where people ask, what is my major, but they ask, what is my problem? What is the problem I'm working on? And have that define the arc of their education. And we'll have a whole new set of people better and ready to be able to address it. And third, opportunities like things like prizes, challenge, and prototyping competitions that we run, particularly tied with opportunities to get the ideas to scale. It's great to have a hackathon, but if it goes nowhere, that is really lost. It is the opportunity to specifically slot into an industry, slot into a larger company, bring the innovations into that, have those partnerships, have the capital at the backside for what you're trying to do, and then open it up. So, there's this great expression that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. So a lot of us need to be in the job of increasing opportunity for people to be able to engage, because we need, just as global health has really used biomedical engineers and entrepreneurs to greatly increase our ability to address the morbidity and mortality of disease, conservation and climate need to do the same thing with the same pool of people.
I guess, Gio, when you kind of think about, as more and more individuals are trying to bring that framework to their work life, through their personal life as well. And you mentioned this kind of corporate partnership piece. if somebody's listening and they're maybe not kind of preparing to kind of move into working at a sustainable company or starting a sustainable company or investing in sustainable companies, but maybe in their kind of day-to-day job, how they could potentially bring and incorporate sustainable thinking into the creations of the products and services and systems that they do, in the company they work at today. How might they approach that to try to win the battle where they work today?
Yeah, I would walk into the executive offices in the corporate boardroom and challenge whether or not the business will exist in 10 years if there's not a sustainable component to it. And I'm mostly joking, but I think if all of us on this panel and probably most of the people listening are probably similarly obsessive and crazy in a way, and we want to spend our time working on solving real problems. And if you're going to spend 60 to 80 hours a week working on something, it better be something that you care about, or else you're going to get burned out pretty quickly. And I think that's what keeps you going, especially in challenging times, and certainly in the startup environment, is having a mission that you believe in and that you care about. And I think that's what makes you successful in helping to solve a problem. So I think there is change that can happen and can be born within some of these larger organizations. And I think it's too easy to say, big corporations are evil and they don't want the right things. I think we have to step back and recognize that they have the power to, we need everybody in this fight. And there are folks like ExxonMobil that actually invented the lithium ion battery in the 70s and maybe didn't commercialize it themselves, but a lot of the big innovations that we are taking advantage of today started at big corporations. And so I think if you're in one of those, if you can play a role in pushing toward more innovation and the solutions that we need to solve the dramatic and immediate problems in our world, I think that's time well spent. It doesn't all have to be in, starting a business or joining a startup, although it seems a lot more fun from my perspective.
Yeah, and I also had some conversations with people from the oil and gas industry recently, and the most terrifying thing for them is not the emissions, it's the talent crunch they're facing. They just are not able to get the PhD pipeline that they used to be able to get straight into into their different divisions. And so, Tim, I guess when you're talking to potential employees, when you're out there putting feelers out for talent, what are the kind of conversations you're having with those people? What are those people kind of inspired by, and how can we best kind of shape a story to get the talent we need to be working on these problems at scale?
Yeah, I totally subscribe to what Gio says. One, I don't think it's an antagonistic play. Like, it's not us against them. It's not like we can do better and they can't. I think big companies and small companies have different strengths and different weaknesses, and we have to play to them. And I think anybody looking for their next opportunity will probably weigh that as well in some way. Like, basically, they will look at like what it means to work for a bigger company or a small company. But no matter what you do, you're going to be pretty busy with it. I mean, maybe in a bigger company you can get away with, say, 40 hours. In the small company, typically it's much more intense. But regardless, even if you work maybe not as much as an entrepreneur would, you still spend a significant amount of your time, working, contributing to something, and that something is going to matter to you. It has to matter. Like, particularly if things get tough and things are not easy, which in startup world is definitely a certainty that it will happen. So making choices around, what really matters to you, like what's going to make you want to get up in the morning, not just tomorrow, but the day after and, the week after, and put all this effort into it. That's a personal choice. And I think what we as entrepreneurs can do is explain like how we can make an impact. So how joining our team can help you drive impact, directly and quite significantly, because in smaller teams, obviously your individual impact will be much bigger. And I think that is a really healthy motivation for people to make choices on their career. I mean, I think that's how most of us make our choices, and I think that's the right way to make these sort of like very significant life choices about like where you want to spend your time and effort, on, and sacrifice other things for, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everybody on the call of our panels today, they have added links that I think we'll be posting here for their careers pages and other places for people to kind of get involved. I think having a call to action, I think, is quite important after events like this. As you've heard, the audience has heard the panelists today. projects that they're working on, the companies they're building, it's basically their, I guess in a positive way, the obsession of their lives, right? They've decided to kind of devote their lives to kind of solving these massive problems. And I guess the thing that I've really learned over the last couple of years by talking to people like our panelists is that you can start very small. You can start at a small thing and then just kind of expand and scale up there. And everybody has a role, right? Even if you're a junior employee, if you're coming out of high school, whatever it may be, you have a role. The people capital, you definitely have a role, right? Invest in these companies and help prompt things in that way as well. And so, I would love to thank our panelists. Thank you, Alex, Gio, and Tim. I'd love to also thank MF for organizing and the people at Tech in Motion. And thank you, the audience, for some great questions.
Everyone so much for joining today. Did I tell you guys that you would be inspired or what? I did not want this conversation to end. I am just so honored and privileged that we got to hear from you guys today. So thank you to our wonderful panelists and our wonderful host, James. You guys were incredible. Like I said, I just wish this didn't have to end. So we're working on getting some of those links in the chat for you guys. So we can all go off video, maybe just for the next couple minutes, or you can stay on video, whatever you want. We'll get those links out to you guys. We'll also be sure to include them in our follow-up email with the webinar recording as well. So you can kind of have everything in one place, because I'm sure many of you are dying just to get involved. I know I am. So we'll get those to you guys. And like I said, make sure that you are following us on social and checking your email to hear about all the events we have upcoming for the new year. And with that, I guess that's when we'll see you. We'll see you in 2022.
Thanks
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.